Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving into now our closing plenary session for this evening, the theme of which is strengthening the National Clean Air Programme for Breathable Air. Now, it's been a beautiful blue day in Delhi today after all the rain, a certain freshness to the air. But as Professor Sachs's graphs made all too clear this morning, the air quality still leaves a lot to be desired. That's true, of course, of many cities across India and indeed the world. That is not to say that progress hasn't been made. I mean, in 20 years of coming to Delhi, I can taste the difference on my tongue. But there's more work to be done, so how do we do it? That's the topic of our next plenary. We're going to welcome onto the dais in a few moments, first of all, our keynote speaker, Mr. C K Mishra, who is Secretary at the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. And then our panelists, Mr. Gaurav Gogoi, who's Honourable Member of Parliament in India, Mr. Jake Schmidt, Managing Director, International Programme of the Natural Resources Defence Council, Ms. Priya Shankar, who's Director of the India Environment Programme at Bloomberg Philanthropies, and Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of TERI. And to chair them, please welcome Mr. Suman Berry, Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Centre for Scholars. Please join us on the dais, gentlemen.
Can I begin? Yes. Okay. Let me start by thanking TERI for the extraordinary privilege of chairing a session on such an important topic with such distinguished people. Let me just say a little bit about myself. I am on the board of something called the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, but actually the hat I'm wearing here is as a citizen of Delhi on the eve of a state election, somebody who was born here, and somebody who frankly is very confused about both how to think about air pollution locally here in Delhi, and what is being done about it. And why am I confused? I'm confused because I'm not really sure what numbers to trust. I'm not really sure how much we know about the various factors that affect seasonality of air pollution. I'm not sure what the official government position is on the health aspects of local air pollution. And as as an analyst, I'm also not clear on what how the government sees the priorities of air pollution on the one hand versus mitigation, climate change on the other. The last of these is of particular interest because when speaking to some of the supporters of the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, we've been told that no, the focus has to be on mitigation and that just that to, in a sense, smuggle in mitigation through the air pollution route would basically confuse the issue. Let me make one other point, which is that Delhi, and I'm talking about my city, not about the country, of course, led in many ways with the shift of its public transport fleet to gas, 10, 12 years ago, no, 20 years ago, something like that. So we can move, and of course we do have this marvelous metro network. But something that bothers me is that a lot of the motion seems to be in response to PILs and court action rather than as an outcome of a democratic process. So I am here to learn as much as you about the scourge of local air pollution, how government thinks about this, and what are practical ways in which this issue can be solved. And I'm very pleased that we have a keynote address by the Secretary of the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Shri C K Mishra. He will give a 8-minute, roughly 8-minute keynote address, and then we will break into the panel. So I will introduce the panel members later. Mr. Mishra, may I ask you?
Mr. Berry, distinguished members on the panel, and well-known faces in the audience today, many of whom know much more than perhaps I know about air quality, pollution, and particularly the impacts, etc. Earlier, I used to be foxed by the fact that nobody seems to be talking about it. It's not becoming mainstream, and people don't seem to be worried. Now I'm actually worried about a different kind of development, where I find everybody to be an expert on air quality, whether it is the problem of the air quality or the solution of the air quality. And that actually shifts the entire discourse in a completely different direction. Air quality and pollution is about science. It's about technology. And it's about understanding the issue. You know, the general belief is that India perhaps today is one of the most polluted countries in the world. It's not. The second general belief is that the whole of India has heavy pollution. But the fact remains that today, if you read each of the monitoring stations, more than half the country, or in fact 3/4 of the country, shows green. The problem today lies largely in the Indo-Gangetic plain. And that is one thing that we need to remember, that the rest of the country has occasional problems, but not as serious a problem as the Indo-Gangetic plain in this country. And there are reasons both of emission as well as meteorology which explain this entire phenomena. So I think rather than being ill-informed, it is more important to understand what are the underlying causes and what are the problems to which we already have a solution. Many of the problems we do have a solution. Occasionally you hear people saying, why don't you put up 100 smog towers in Delhi and everything will be clean? Scientists tell me that it will not happen. It may be a perception, but that's not the reality. But we have a well thought of strategy in mind based on what science has taught us. And that strategy I'll come to later in terms of the National Clean Air Program, which we are discussing today. But Delhi in particular has been in focus because actually we can't afford to have a capital which is as polluted as Delhi. Notwithstanding the fact that over the last 3 years, the particulate matter which account for the pollution have come down by about close to 23-24%. There is a gradual improvement, but I must say it's far too gradual for anybody's comfort. We need to focus, and we need to focus on what we think are micro solutions to this macro problem in the Indo-Gangetic plain and particularly in Delhi. And it is based on this that the National Clean Air Program was framed. Mr. Berry raised a question of what is the government's perception of impact of air pollution on health. We strongly believe it's about life. I mean, I will not get into numbers of the morbidity or mortality that air quality causes because it's very difficult to put a number to it. But the fact remains that it hastens morbidity and can lead to mortality. Therefore, it is critical that we ensure clean air for people of this country, particularly in Delhi. So it's about understanding and knowledge of the problem and the solution. And as I said, it has to be science-based. For the simple reason that the solution do not lie in traditional methods any longer. They've been tried long enough. And the solution is also not there in a single aspect of air quality. If you look at air quality in totality, let's take Delhi, for example, since that's what's been worrying most of the people. I mean, the good news is that this is the first year in the last 6 years or 7 years that we have 182 what we call green days, which are good days, more than half a year. That's a good news. The bad news is that the reduction in the number of severe days is only marginal. But if you look at it year on year, there is a marginal improvement. And I said initially, it's a difficult task. No place in the world has been able to achieve it in 2 or 3 years. But if you persist with the policy that you are following for the next 3 years, I am very confident that we'll have a much better air quality than we have today. Look at the kind of measures that are being taken. Vehicular pollution. This year, I believe one of the major reasons for reduction in vehicular pollution is the opening of the eastern peripheral and western peripheral in Delhi, for example. You leapfrog from BS4 to BS6. The introduction of e-mobility, all this will add to it. But then, all this is a gradual process. In a place where you have 60 lakh two-wheelers, which are most polluting, when you have a policy where you are not able to address the problem of the numbers, you are not able to actually fix a level of public transport which is comfortable, it will take time. If you take dust and C&D, for example, construction and demolition waste, which is a major contributor to the pollution in this area. It's always thought that it is government and government's responsibility alone to control the construction, control the dust, control the C&D waste. I do agree the government must take responsibility. But I guess we would get much faster results if we shared responsibilities with the people. And we do need participation of the people, at least in this aspect. Let us take the case of industry. We worked very hard, and Delhi, about 90% of the industry has switched over to PNG. But then we have a serious problem of industries which we do not even have as registered industries. Their pollutions we are not able to control. We have thermal plants. We closed down Badarpur, but there are other plants in the vicinity which still have not attained the standards, and perhaps another 2 months something will happen to them as well. We are working on it. We have to, all these little pieces have to come together to form a complete whole if you really want to have improved air quality in Delhi. I mean, if you look at these smaller municipal bodies across the country, the work on municipal solid waste that is being done there is much better than what we are managing in Delhi. So that is the scenario that I want to present before you. That is the problem. And there are so many players and actors that unless you try and get all of them together, you will not get the desired results. Therefore, I strongly feel that the plan that we have, we need to pursue with all the vigor that we have. And we need to pursue it along with the people so that we are able to get there. One of the wonderful things about the National Clean Air Program is that the 122 cities that we have chosen, based on their levels of pollution, we are not asking for a generic state or a national plan. We are preparing a city-specific plan with the city's requirement and then trying and fund that so that those requirements of the cities can be met, because each city has a different reason for pollution. And if we are able to push this in the next 2-3 years effectively, I think we would have done a good job. And if you look at the kind of city plans that are coming in, they're taking care of everything. The vehicular emission, the industry, the dust, all these are being factored in that. But then, unfortunately, some of the work that has been done in other states is in silos. I mean, Indore is an example everybody quotes. Indore did it because they put everything together. Unfortunately, in this country, very often we look for good examples outside the country rather than within our country. There are some excellent examples within the country which we can emulate and replicate in many of the cities. And we need to do that very seriously. It is not an easy problem. It's a very complicated problem, and it needs a lot of time to explain the problem, but most of you know that. I strongly feel that it is not the knee-jerk reaction that will solve the problem. Mr. Berry mentioned about government's inactivity and judicial activity, which has led to many of the things. Yes, some of the things have come from judicial activity as well. But it's good to have a judiciary which is supporting you in your program. And let me assure you that government has a plan and everybody knows about it. And if you slip or if somebody else is slipping, it's good to have a taskmaster to tell you that you're slipping. It's complementary. And at the end of the day, no matter who drives it, as long as we are able to get the results, it's worth the while. But what I was hinting at is not the knee-jerk reaction that will help us get out of this mess. We need a good medium-term and a long-term plan. The medium-term plan is to reduce the particulate matter by at least about 30% in the next 5 years. And the long-term plan is to bring it to 50% over the next few years. And I have reasons to believe, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of input from the panelists here, I have reasons to believe the kind of program that we have in place today, we will be able to do that. But it will be possible only if we're able to forge a good communication channel and a common platform which government must provide for the civil society, for the academia, and those who are working in the field to come together and find solutions to smaller little problems that we have everywhere. I think we need to solve these micro problems to get over the macro issue that we have today before us. I'm grateful to you for having invited me here today. If there are any other issues which you would like me to respond to, I'd be very happy. Mr. Berry has given me 8 minutes. I think I've crossed that long time back, so thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. And Secretary, please be assured that you now are a member of the panel as well. Okay, so that when people have the Q's and A's, those can be addressed to you. So we now move on to the panel, and essentially, while I'm aiming for a conversation, people have come perhaps with prepared remarks, so I'm going to give them the opportunity to do so. One of the speakers is not present, as you would have seen, and that is is Jasmine Shah, the Vice Chairperson of the Dialogue and Development Commission of Delhi. So the broad sequence would be for us to start to follow up on Secretary's comments by inviting our parliamentarian, giving us another perspective at the national level. We will then move on to points of view about India and other countries from overseas speakers or speakers aware of the overseas. I'll end up with Dr. Ajay Mathur, in part because there are some documents to be launched. And then I do hope to provide enough time for a Q&A because this is an issue of considerable public interest. So without further ado, let me ask Mr. Gaurav Gogoi to make his remarks. He is in his second term as an MP in the 17th Lok Sabha and as a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, and is contemplating a private member's bill. And Mr. Gogoi, we've already talked about the checks and balances in a democratic system. The judiciary, yes, but please give us a sense of, as it were, how satisfied you are in Parliament and what you feel the role of the of Parliament, particularly the Lok Sabha, is to, as it were, hold government accountable.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. A very good afternoon to the panelists and members of the audience. I'll try to keep my opening statement short because I also look forward to an interaction. But as we've talked about in the previous panelists' opening remarks, that we have a very engaged citizenry, we have an engaged media, we have an engaged judiciary, we have an engaged executive, and my aim is to have an engaged legislature. And that is where I come in as a member of parliament from a party which has been in power in state, which has been in power at the center, and has also been out of power. So we understand the realities of governance, we understand the realities of the Indian administrative services, but also being in opposition, we understand the urgency and the emergency that faces the people of India today. So what I'm doing, first of all, because many would be wondering why you have a member of the opposition party on such a platform. So as I said, that my main aim is to get an engaged legislature, an engaged legislative body. As a consequence of that, what we're trying to do is try to convene the first ever cross-party forum of parliamentarians cutting across regions, cutting across age groups, cutting across ranks, cutting across both the lower house and the upper house. We've managed to do that very successfully in the last legislative session. We've had a very positive response from the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. We've had a very positive response from members across political parties. You saw a discussion in the parliament as well. And it's very good to see that on such an issue, the number of times we as parliamentarians have sat on this issue, we've sat without drawing any daggers. We have sat without pointing any blame unnecessarily. I think that's a very good thing because air pollution should be a bipartisan issue and it should be a national issue. Second of all, what we're trying to do is engage with the committee chairmen that we have in Parliament. Now, air pollution, as mentioned by the Secretary, doesn't sit within any one particular ministry because the emitters are multi-sectoral. So Ministry of Agriculture has a role, Ministry of Power has a role, Ministry of Energy and Renewable Energy has a role, Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Road Transport has a role, and certainly enough, Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Urban Development. While we can't engage with the ministers directly, we can engage with the committees, with the Parliament standing committees, with the Parliament select committees. And this is what we've done in the previous session as well, that we've engaged with the chairmen of the Standing Committee on Environment, we've engaged with the chairman of the Standing Committee on Urban Development, and trying to mainstream air pollution in their agenda as well as they call upon representatives of the government, private sector, and civil society. Dr. Berry mentioned a private member's bill. I think that's very important that we also look at the role of legislation. And frankly speaking, I believe when the Air Act as it exists in India today, when it did come up in the late 70s, early 80s, I think at that time, the India that it was addressing was a very different India than what we face today with our urbanization and growth in population. So there is certain fundamental changes that needs to be in the Air Act, which is what I'm proposing through my private member's bill. The first and most important change that I'm trying to bring is to link air pollution with health. Now, if you look at the US Clean Air Act, health is right there in the preamble of the US Clean Air Act, talking about that the entire aim of the Air Act, the Clean Air Act, is for the safety and living and quality of life of our citizens. And surely, given the fact that we are worried about our children, worried about the impact on the lungs of our family members and elderly, people working on the streets, MCD sanitation workers, traffic policemen, surely the Air Act needs to link health and make health of its citizens a priority focus. Now, we have heard the Secretary say that while they understand that there is a health impact, but unfortunately, whenever there's a health study that links air pollution to health with respect to number of years or morbidity, because these studies are coming from international organizations, sometimes they are disregarded by the government, and that's a logical approach. I understand without blaming the government that government has a way of looking at data, especially when it comes from external agencies. So the second point with respect to health is to the Ministry of Environment and Health, and especially the Central Pollution Control Board. Please commission your own health study. Please have your own health study, and please give us your indicators of what is the impact of health. And surely if you do that study, nobody would be happy with a 25% reduction in Delhi's air pollution, because you would see the amount of reduction that we need. Surely we can't have a 15, 20-year-old roadmap. We need a 10-year roadmap, and we need a 10-year target. So please commission your own health study. Talking about data, the government itself needs to understand that what is a uniform set of data. Two ministries cannot have two different sets of data. The Ministry of Earth Sciences data on air quality cannot be different from the Ministry of Environment and Health, and surely that cannot be different from another agency as well. So let again the Central Pollution Control Board define the polluting sources that it would measure, define how it would measure, and define standards that everyone would adhere to. And that brings to the central piece of my, of the work that I'm trying to do with air pollution, is the governance and the architecture of it. And this is where I draw sympathy with the government, because the Central Pollution Control Board, which is the nodal agency even in the National Clean Air Program, and I'm sure the Secretary would agree, there is so much of capacity building that needs to be done. So much more positions that need to be filled, so much more data and resources to be given, so much more qualified people to be given in terms of composition, in terms of domain expertise. So I'm all for empowering the Central Pollution Control Board, either with legislative sanction or with powers that come from the Finance Ministry, or with a much more political based empowerment coming directly from the leadership. So I feel that unless we don't have an empowered Central Pollution Control Board and an empowered state pollution control boards working together, we might have very ambitious programs under the National Clean Air Program, but where is the mandate? Where is the mandate for the Ministry of Road Transport to listen to the advice of the Central Pollution Control Board? So in the end, I don't want to belabor my point, but as I said, that as a student of governance, as a student of legislation, I do not look upon air pollution as an insurmountable problem, as an intractable problem, as a problem that cannot be fixed or it's too big. India has taken on much bigger problems in the past and we've solved them. We've taken on much bigger challenges when it comes to eradicating polio. We've taken on much bigger challenges when it's about making sure that education and health is universally accessible. So I think air pollution is a solvable problem. It's a doable problem. We have the wherewithal. We have the resources. It's just about putting our minds together and giving ourselves a much more ambitious target. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gogoi. So I think that this provides a natural segue to some of the international experience. And I'd like to call on Jake Schmidt, the Managing Director for International Programs at the NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council, which I see is actually an associate partner of this conference. So Jake, I know that you have experience in India, but you are from an institution that's based in the United States. So as you share your thoughts with us, maybe you can give us some sense of what the journey has been like in the US. I first got to the US in 1972 when LA had its smog, when rivers in, the Midwest were burning, and I remember taking the train into New York City, and that part of New Jersey was just a stinking mess. So there must be the same coordination issues, et cetera. So perhaps before you talk about what you're seeing in India right now, you can try and strike a balance between, as it were, what Secretary has been saying, kalma, kalma, we'll get there, and what, quite rightly, the Member of Parliament has been saying, that the health consequences are so profound that there's no time to lose, and we need something different from business as usual. So could I ask you to address some of these issues as well as your observations on what you see in India?
Yes, happy to. Can you hear me? All right, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this distinguished panel. Obviously, this is a ongoing and important conversation within India and around the world. So, a little context. Nearly 5 million people die every year around the world from air pollution, according to the 2017 Global Burden of Disease study. So there's a number of countries around the world grappling with a similar thing. There are, I think, as you alluded to, lessons on how to do it right and how to solve this challenge in the wrong way. Not just from the US, but obviously China has embarked on efforts to grapple with its massive air pollution as well. So I'll try to touch upon a couple of those. I think the first piece to think about is, this was alluded to before, but air pollution is directly tied to health. It is clear, the science is very solid. Children, unfortunately, are in the front lines of that. The development of their lungs, their development means that they suffer a higher proportion of the impacts given the same level of air pollution. And I think, as we all know, children are our future, so we can't waste, any generations. What we found in the U.S. is that these investments in air pollution controls pay for themselves. So in the U.S., for every dollar that's invested in air pollution, the EPA has found that that has resulted in $30 of benefits.
This EPA?
Not the Trump administration EPA, the science-based version of that. I'm not sure what they conclude on that, but there's not many, I think, financial investments that pay a 30-to-1 return. I wish my personal financial investments had that kind of return, not even close. So, I think the other piece that we're finding and we found is that, governments have to both have a clear documentation of the challenge, build that capacity, but I think also importantly, look at the solutions. So from our experience, both in the US, but we've been working in Ahmedabad and Pune on their air information response plans. So one of the things that we've been doing with both those places, again, is a lesson, it's a piece that we've copied from the US, is that the children have a school flags program, so when the air is bad, they put up a flag on their school. Red is for bad, yellow's for medium, green's for good. It's a way, children talk to their parents, so they inform their parents. It's a way to kind of build that information. So there's now 90 schools in Ahmedabad that have the school children flag, and over 100 schools in Pune that do that. The second piece that I think is really important is you have to have, this was alluded to, you have to have government agencies across the different silos talk to each other and sit at the table and come up with solutions. Air pollution is not an energy agency's problem, separate from a transport problem. So when we've had success in Ahmedabad and Pune, we've actually seen the government and ministries, the different agencies, the different responsible parties sit at the same table and develop it. I think the third piece, and this is not too surprising, is that you have to actually have a plan to take steps to mitigate that air pollution. You have to have regulatory systems, you have to have a compliance system, you have to have some way to hold government officials or individuals accountable if they don't deliver on that. There's lots of different models that you can adopt. Different places have done it a different way. And I think the last piece, and I think this is a place where you don't actually have to learn from the US, because the solutions are much easier now than they were in 1970 in the US when first grappled with it. So renewable energy, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, which are very cost competitive now. solve multiple solutions, or multiple challenges. They solve an air pollution challenge, they solve an energy scarcity challenge, they solve a energy security challenge, they solve a jobs challenge. So how do you sort of couple those pieces together? And then the last piece I'll say, just to identify is, we looked at the national clean air plans of 10 large cities in India to sort of look at what the lessons are from those existing plans. We have a new report that we released that I'm happy to share with folks. And what we found is that, not surprising, we've seen some important progress. The actual fact of the National Clean Air Plan has created the conversation within governments, but clearly more capacity needs to be built in some of these local governments to be able to document the problems, and then more importantly, to figure out a path forward on a solution. But it's also clear that we need to move forward, that these governments need to move forward with some of the low-hanging fruit. There's things that are, as I said, win-win-win, that governments can move forward with as they're dealing with the challenges. So more clean energy, more electric vehicles and buses, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, taxis, et cetera, are clear sort of triple solutions.
Thanks, Jake. So Priya, you're next, and Priya is the India Director for Environment Programs at Bloomberg Philanthropies. You obviously know about India, but you also have experience from New York to share. So in light of the conversation up till now, both in terms of the science, in terms of consciousness raising, in terms of the interaction between local politicians and citizenry at the level of a city, what lessons do you think India should be drawing from New York, and whatever you may be doing in India right at the minute?
Thank you, Mr. Berry, and thank you to TERI for organizing this wonderful panel at Bloomberg Philanthropies. We're really delighted to be working in partnership with the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and other partners such as TERI and the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation on a technical assistance initiative around the National Clean Air Program, as part of which we're supporting work in Indian cities such as Surat and Patna and Bengaluru. And this is a thing that in India is a particularly acute challenge, air quality. And I just wanted to say, alluding to the point that were made earlier, that from Bloomberg Philanthropies' perspective, we see air quality really at the intersection of both public health and climate change. So we don't think it's a trade-off between emissions reduction for climate change benefits versus trying to address air pollution. We think there are strong co-benefits of the two, and they're really sort of two sides of the same coin. And as Jake said, it also brings benefits for human health and also sustainable development and economic productivity. According to a World Bank study that was conducted in 2016, air pollution causes the world economy over $5 trillion and more than 4% of global GDP. So solving for air pollution improves health, improves well-being, helps mitigate against climate change, and helps with economic development and growth. So we really see solving for air pollution as a win-win across multiple areas and many different issues. That being said, air pollution can often appear a really intractable problem, I think especially in India, because the causes are so complex. They range from causes of sort of underdevelopment, things like cooking and waste burning, as well as causes that relate to sort of modernization and development sort of industries and increasing car use and power plants. And I'd really like to congratulate the TERI team in breaking down these multiple causes and producing some interesting discussion papers around a number of different issues, which will be launched later today by Dr. Mathur, that talk about fleet modernization, cooking, crop burning, and look at also the power sector. And they sort of propose solutions for a number of different sectors and show that this is a solvable problem. I'd also like to share an example from the New York City experience, where when Mike Bloomberg was elected as mayor of New York City, he developed a plan for a greater and greener New York. And one of the goals of this plan was to reduce air pollution in the city. research found that heating in buildings was one of the biggest causes of air pollution. And by really targeting that with a very effective program that brought together multiple stakeholders called the NYC Clean Heat Initiative, the city administration was able to reduce sulfur pollution by 70% and particulate pollution by 20%, and leading New York City to have its cleanest air in over 50 years. And I'm just going to do a time check. I have a few other lessons. Do I have more time?
Yes. It's really for the audience to decide, because you'll be cutting into their time. But I'll give you another minute or two.
So drawing on the New York City experience and also on this report that we were really honored to launch yesterday at the World Sustainable Development Summit on accelerating city progress on clean air, produced by Vital Strategies, and also drawing on experiences of success in other parts of the world, such as Mexico City and London, I think there's 4 key things that we can point to that have really helped in driving progress. I think the first is better evidence and data, but as this report points out, it's not only about trying to get perfectly accurate data. It's about also sort of working with whatever data is available and starting action without necessarily waiting for the best data. So having these as 2 parallel processes where action happens simultaneously with better data collection and evidence. The second is around policy leadership. And this is a point that was made earlier around bringing together different agencies, having that coordination in the work that we're supporting in India, in Patna, the Clean Air Action Plan that we've supported. It's really brought together many different line departments. There's been a strong leadership from the state government around this, integrating the coordination. In Surat, the work that we've supported, there's actually a partnership agreement between the municipal corporation and the State Pollution Control Board that's bringing these 2 bodies together to really work in synergy, and that's very important. And the third is sort of really people and public awareness, and examples from China really show how critical having better public awareness was in driving change. And we see that happening in Delhi, and it's nice to see the growing public awareness. And the final point is around, the fourth thing is around partnerships. So having partnerships between government, civil society, industry, and technical partners, academic institutions. And we also see that happening in India now, increasing number of partnerships around air quality. And all of this really gives me hope that progress is possible.
Okay, thanks, Priya. So, Ajay, we are now running out of audience time. May I then, as it were, put some of the key questions that have come up to you, and then there will be time for Secretary to return, to kind of comment at the end. So I think the following questions, given where you sit and given the fact, as Priya has mentioned, you've undertaken detailed work. Firstly, Secretary asserted that it's primarily the Indo-Gangetic plain. Almost all of the cases that we've heard about are outside the Indo-Gangetic plain. So your comment on, as it were, what is behind this movement, as it were, and is there sufficient, as it were, awareness of how deep the concern is outside the Indo-Gangetic plain? Point number 1. Secondly, has the consciousness battle been won nationally, locally? And I think yesterday in your discussion with Lord Turner and Jairam Ramesh, you talked about the last decade in terms of consciousness on climate change. Has there been a tipping point? Why has there been a tipping point? Thirdly, on the issue of alignment between various levels of government, various silos, what do you see in terms of progress? And finally, the issue of jurisdictions. We've had, as it were, these controversies about the adjoining states on stubble burning and ourselves. My understanding is that Los Angeles, had something called an air quality district. Are we organized to internalize the externality of something which does not respect jurisdictional boundaries? So quick responses to those, and maybe you want to put in a plug for what is going to be released.
Suman, I'll only take about an hour.
Okay. It's your hour.
First of all, if you see a satellite picture of India, you see the swath of smoke over the Indo-Gangetic Plain. This is because of many reasons, primarily meteorology. But the meteorology is driven by the fact that the vast number of households in this region use biomass as a fuel for cooking. And this is not in urban areas. But because it happens across the plains, because you've got the Himalayas on one side and wind directions in a particular direction, this is where it gets done. And it superimposes itself on what happens in cities. This is why the Indo-Gangetic Plain is so important. That's number one. Second, we have, due to a variety of reasons, but most importantly, the data regarding pollution coming out in the public domain, and people are saying, oh, I went to the doctor, that was the day of the high air. There has been a movement from a private thought to a public thought to public policy. We now have the National Clean Air Program. That's the second part. The third part is regarding how do we act. People on the panel and the secretary talked about the fact that while the problems across India are because of 4 or 5 reasons, the mix is different. So, for example, transport is a big reason in Bangalore. In Ludhiana, it's industry which is the larger reason. It's not as if transport isn't. But biomass burning, transport, industry, and power stations are the largest sources almost across all cities in India. It varies, and therefore you need the city-specific plans to make sure where you will attack. For that, you need source apportionment. Now, how do we deal with it? If the pollution is coming from far away, even across the boundaries, it's all the upwind directions, clearly airshed districts make sense. Can we do it? No. I, for one, was very proud when we passed the Air Act. I was a student at that time, and then the Environmental Pollution Act, and delegated responsibilities. Extremely proud. In an era of centralization, here was something which delegated responsibilities. Alas, we now have no tools to create the cross-jurisdictional boundaries that you are talking about. Nevertheless, whether it is Indore or Surat or Patna, we have seen that when various agencies come together, there is action that is possible. So this is to say that there are possibilities for action to happen. What would be the ideal governance structure? I'm not still sure, but I think this is an area that we need to focus on. And possibly, Mr. Gogoi, one of the things that you may think of is having some kind of enabling mechanism to enable these kinds of airshed districts with proper governance to be created. So, for example, California is right now divided into 23 airshed districts, with each district having 2 or 3 counties, something of that sort. This leads to the issue that if there are 3 or 4 areas or 5 big areas which are the cause, then we need to learn what has worked. There are cities where transport has worked, a particular transport solution has worked. There are cities where the LPG penetration, or states where LPG penetration has had huge impact. If you look at Delhi, we have, within the NCR of Delhi, there is almost no biomass burning in households. But upwind of Delhi, there is. There's still 16 lakh households upwind of Delhi which use biomass. So, in my view, as we learn from this, we need to be able to document it and share it across the country. The briefs that we released today are what could be done in the area of biomass burning, where LPG penetration is the key issue. The issue is now people are not getting refills. Okay, how do we do it? So that's what it addresses. There's an issue of fleet modernization. How do we get the inefficient cars off the road? Move them to BS6 or move them to electric. How do we do it? What are the kinds of mechanisms which will make this happen? Issues regarding agricultural residue management. Secretary talked of the fact that you are seeing improvements. As we look in Delhi, most of the year, the air pollution is almost at the level of the national air quality standards, and he's right, most of the year it is becoming better, which is why you don't see the severe, which is why in many 183 days, it did not move out of the green range. But then you have 3 months of the year when it just peaks. And it peaks because of the firecrackers you and I burn on Diwali. Please think about what you will do next year. It burns because of the agricultural residues that are burnt, and it is there because of meteorology. All these three things combine. And if we don't reduce the emissions, there is no way that this will be addressed. So agricultural management is a key issue. We need to monetize the collection of wastes. So on these, we would like to put these, we have put the documentation together. We would like to share it with as many jurisdictions as possible with a view of seeing how they can help action in various jurisdictions. So it's slightly less than 1 hour, but I hope I've addressed the questions you raised.
Secretary, you have the right to reply as a member of the panel, but would you be willing for me to take 3 questions and then maybe respond as you, yeah? Yeah, okay. So let me, yes. So please, a question and identify yourself, and there may not be time for more than 2 rounds of 3, so quickly, please. I think you spoke at the last session, sir, so. No, please, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Good evening to everybody. I'm Vivek Narayan Sharma, and I'm a Joint Secretary in Supreme Court AOR Association. I'm an advocate essentially in Supreme Court. So my question would be from the Honorable Secretary sitting here. As you conceded that out of 365 days, 183 days, we face pollution in Delhi. And at the same time, the policy that the government has, 18% of GST is being levied on the air purifiers here. Air mask, 5% of levy. So why don't we, if we really want to really comfort the people of Delhi, and even at those places where these pollutions are recurring, so why don't we make it zero to facilitate the people of Delhi and those places where pollution is too much higher? Won't it be beneficial for all the people?
I think we get the question. So that was from the middle row. Is there anybody on this side who is waiting to?
My question is to
your name, please.
Yeah, I'm Rashida from Bombay. I'm an educator in climate change and sustainable development. My question is to Priya Shankar specifically with regards to the work you are doing is concerning air. And so all these changes that the government has done, the current government in US, how is it impacting you? Because especially in California, the dilution of the Air and Water Acts. So how would your further work be impacted by this? Because a lot of polluting industries have been given a go-ahead and, you can put your sludge and everything in the water now.
Thank you.
How do you look at the dynamics of NGOs in this sector also? Thank you.
So I think you were also in the last session. Is there anybody who I'm missing who hasn't spoken so far? Otherwise, yeah, quickly.
I think basic question is that I am Professor H.M. Desad. I was member of Maharashtra's Planning Board. And I was practicing farmer and I earned my bread teaching economics.
Right.
With all that background, in retrospect, I feel growth and governance model of India is anti-nature.
Is it something that somebody on the panel can address?
Gaurav, and maybe Secretary, and very brief. Anti-nature, anti-poor and anti-women. स्त्री और सृष्टि के शोषण पर सारा विकास है. And to get out, and very specific question to that, since you are moving that making legislatures active and getting involved. I think that's the right step. Congratulations. The point is that no legislature talks about the environment issues. And despite one of the best person with you as a Jairam Ramesh in the environment department, I'm very sorry to say that you could not improve the pollution control boards.
Okay, so that's an observation.
They are the pollution promotion boards. And Secretary Saab, one sentence, you said, Beryl, I fully agree with you. सारे देश में लर्निंग एग्जाम्पल है. मैं औरंगाबाद से आता हूँ, and we are suffering this problem of waste. And what is waste? Waste is a thing in wrong place. After 70 years of independence, we are talking only of segregating the waste. Where are our minds? I think Babus and Netas, unless they change totally, I think people of India, there is information.
We are like that only. So, Secretary, you have the first word. And not only in response to the questions, but also in response to what the other panelists may have said.
The question on air purifier and GST, let me just take it slightly differently, because I would not like to get down to a product. I mean, as a ministry, you would like to be technology and product agnostic. The larger question is, shouldn't government step up its support, whether through GST or any other mechanism, for all green technologies? And I think time has come when we need to seriously think and do that, and we need to promote green technologies. Just a word on the air purifiers. We have recently, in fact, asked the NPL, the National Physical Laboratory, to do it. In India, I think we need to seriously look at the standards and quality and calibrate all those equipments where there are several claims which we need to establish. It may give you a great psychological comfort, or may even be correct. We don't know, so we want to know. And that is why we have given that job. And to the Honorable MP, we have started a study on the health impact. The CPCB is just undertaking it. And hopefully, in the next 6 months, we should have some results out of it, so that out of our own data, which at least we consider reliable, we'll be able to conclude where we are. And I don't see that the results are going to be very dramatically different. But then, that will be a reliable study which we'll have with ourselves. Waste generation is a problem. And that's also, I mean, I take your comment seriously that the Babus and the Netas must change. But I think what also must change is the attitude of complete dependence on government for everything that we have in our life. And what must also change is the attitude of having everything for free. There's a cost to everything which we must share, and there's a methodology of joining hands with government to take up issues which we need to resolve. I think I'll leave it at that. And if
Secretary, if I could be permitted one question.
Yes, please.
Where do you think India should try to lead, as it were? Because there are, lots of countries in Africa, elsewhere, who look to India to lead scientifically in terms of, call it jugaad, call it innovation, etc., in this whole area of the link between air pollution and health. Where would you feel that India should try and blaze a path for the rest of the world?
Given the fact that no other country in this world has the kind of diversity that we have, and the problems being different in every region, I think one thing that I would really like India to take a leadership on is innovation. Local technologies for local solutions, rather than taking global technologies and trying it all over. I think if we can get to that, we'll have a huge solution at our hands.
Right. Let me now ask you, Mr. Gogoi. I mean, there is this, no, so I'm sorry, the time for questions is now over. We're in the final wrap up. Okay, well, I mean, you can engage with people, but I'm required to bring this to a close. So, you know, why is there so much cynicism and despair about the system delivering where, you know, we have achieved, you know, the Green Revolution, polio, etc. So, you know, just in terms of, let me, you know, I've lived a long time in the United States. I mean, even when the US is making a mess of things, the attitude is always, we'll get it solved. Our attitude seems to be, you know, even when we're getting it solved, we're making a mess of things. So how do we change the rhetoric?
I think we change the rhetoric by showing the case studies and examples of where we're doing well. We change the mindset by, you know, by propagating examples of what's been done in Indore or Ahmedabad or what the government is doing. It's by showcasing your efforts and is the best way of changing people's minds. So first of all, I mean, by listening to what other panelists have said, I would definitely request that in the future we can have the members of parliament who are from the cities under NCAP to be briefed on the city action plans and to be briefed on the case studies. And I'm happy to work with the ministry as well as with the civil society as well. Secondly, and I agree with the secretary here, India has to be a trailblazer in innovation which is affordable and accessible. We've done that with so many of our policy challenges, whether it's health with polio, even to, let's say, Aadhaar, to get so many people on a biometrics. I think it's phenomenal. So I think, again, with air pollution, we must do it because the world expects that of us. I feel sorry that, in Asia, we keep talking about India and China, and here are the two big polluters dumping our entire pollution on countries like Bhutan and Nepal and Bangladesh. Surely you can imagine what smaller countries in the neighborhood must be thinking about us. That, here is this, where Bhutan is trying to be a, zero carbon or carbon negative economy, and we have its biggest neighbor, India, just dumping the entire, our pollution onto them or onto Bangladesh as well. So I think India has to play a leadership role, if not in the world, but at least definitely in South Asia.
Our guests, any concluding comments before we go to the launch? Jake, or?
Well, I mean, just to add, I mean, the evolution, to Dr. Matra, I'm not sure where this will go, but the evolution of the air pollution law in the US was a movement away from the devolving decision-making to local governments. The conclusion, I mean, it's tough for politicians to reflect this, but the conclusion is air pollution cuts across a lot of boundaries. Local government officials don't always have the right incentive structure because they have a hard time pushing against the polluting industries because they have to run for re-election. So the evolution of the air pollution law in the US was a lot more ceding back of authority to local governments back to the national government. And the other piece which really drove a lot of the progress, in particular in the coal-fired power plants, was the eastern states in the US were basically downwind of all of the Midwest coal plants, and they sued the US government to basically rectify that problem, claiming that they can't meet the air pollution standards dictated by law because of pollution outside of their boundaries. And so that led to a court settlement where then those states had to put pollution control. And so in the US, coal-fired power plants in the US now have over 90% SOx, NOx, PM2.5, and mercury control. Well, about 99% mercury, NOx, SOx, PM2.5 control, and about 90% mercury control. And that's obviously been a huge evolution in the air pollution challenge, and then obviously the transportation evolution has been sort of key to that. So those are sort of the lessons. Obviously you can't copy and paste those lessons to an Indian context, just as you couldn't copy and paste those to a Chinese context, but I think those are some of the steps.
Priya, any thoughts? Quickly,
just a very quick response to the question is that while I'm not going to comment on the specifics of US politics, in general, we believe that states and cities and businesses and industry and NGOs can still play a powerful role in addressing environmental issues, even if the national government isn't creating such a favorable atmosphere. I think there's still a role for other organizations to play in addressing environmental issues and other levels of state and city leadership, which we've seen. In terms of the institutional question here, I think it's really, like the session title says, it's really about multi-level action. I think national, state, and city level action is required. And I think one of the points, again, that this guide lays out, as well as some of the TERI work lays out, is which level of action will depend on the issue. So there has to be an issue-related mapping according to where different powers lie, and action has to be really targeted at that level. And of course, the broader questions around the Indo-Gangetic Plain and regional institutions remain. China did a lot around creating regional institutions. There's a question around whether India can do that or not, or should do that or not. But while those debates go on, national, state, and city level action will be required.
Okay, well, I think you just got the plug, Ajay, so you have the last word.
Well, thank you very much. I think the last word would be that we are delighted to share the discussion papers regarding 3 or 4 concrete ways to enhance air quality in cities. We hope that these are discussed and circulated and help in moving the rhetoric forward. So can I request you, all of you, to help release these documents?
We just come forward, then it'll be easier.
Thank you.